Today, we'll be sharing the story of a man named Arturo Carmona. Don't forget to subscribe, and let's dive into this fascinating story. What's his name?
My name is Arturo Carmona. It all started when I heard about an illegal trip because a friend called me saying he had found a way to enter the United States. He knew I wanted to go. My friend told me, "There's a trip, but you have to be ready quickly because it's leaving soon." Specifically, the trip was set for the next day.
All right, but let's break things down. First, tell me about the journey. How do you get to Mexico in a small boat? We're in the Dominican Republic, and reaching Mexico by sea in a small boat sounds insane.
I'm explaining it to you step by step. The first thing I did was gather the little money I had and pay the people organizing the trip. It cost $1,200 to get to Mexico on the small boat. They informed me that the boat would leave from the Dominican Republic at 5 a.m. At 5 a.m., we set off from the city of Santo Domingo, from a port in a place called Jaina. The captains of this small boat kept telling us that this trip was supposedly legal. They even had us sign some contracts. The journey lasted about a day and a half until we reached Mexico.
How many people besides yourself were on that trip?
Well, not counting the captains, there were 4 people I knew, but the total number of people I didn't know was around 12.
It's crazy to fit so many people on such a small boat. How did the journey go? Was everything okay? Mexico is far if you're going by boat.
Actually, if you can believe it, the whole journey was smooth. Everything was normal, no deaths. Everything went peacefully until we reached Mexico. Once we arrived, we rented a hotel, but I should clarify that we were there illegally. Over the course of a few days, we made our way to a place called Tijuana, which is in Mexico. In Tijuana, we went to the house of a friend of one of the men traveling with us. And we stayed there, waiting for several weeks until there was an opportunity to cross into the United States.
Did you work during that time to be able to eat or anything like that?
No, we didn't work, but some of the guys on that trip had family in the United States who sent them money daily. Look, while we were in Mexico, it was almost like staying at a hotel. Everything was fine up until that point. Things got uncomfortable the day we were going to try to cross into the United States.
All right, I get it now. The adventure begins when you try to cross into the United States. So, tell me how everything happened.
Well, we'd been waiting for about 3 weeks for one of the men's uncles, as he was supposed to let us know when it would be safe to cross. Apparently, this uncle had some contacts who could inform him of the right moment to attempt it. But the problem started when 2 of the guys with us, named Jimmy and Makey, got impatient. The uncle, who wanted to get us across safely, called us and said we'd come too far to lose patience now and just needed to wait for the right moment when his contact would signal. Actually, a former Mexican police officer wanted to help us. One night, we made a Dominican-style dinner, and he liked it so much that he told us that, even though he was a former police officer, he would try to help by reaching out to some contacts to see if we could get across to the United States. And so, a week passed, and the men who were with me started to get desperate. They called someone in California, and that person sent what they call a coyote, the people who help you cross from one side to the other. This coyote spoke with Makey and Jimmy, and according to him, we would cross into the United States in 3 hours. Unfortunately, things didn't go as planned. The next day we took a bus, as the plan was to cross through the desert. The bus dropped us off in the middle of a highway, and next to the highway was a sort of cliff, so we started to climb down. From there on, it was all desert. The bus dropped us off around 10 in the morning, so we started walking. The problem was the sun and the heat. It was way too hot. We walked for hours, and by 4 in the afternoon, we thought that at some point, the sun had to set, and things would get better. But it was the opposite. The longer the time passed, the hotter it got. I couldn't understand why, because usually when the sun sets, the temperature should drop. Finally, night came. At least we had some water and food, so we rested for about 3 hours.
How many people were there crossing the desert?
At that moment, there were 5 of us, as a Mexican man had joined the group a few days before because he was also crossing. Including the coyote, there were 6 of us crossing the desert.
And how much did you have to pay the coyote to help you cross?
Well, at that time, he was going to charge us $1,500 each, and that was in the year 2000. So, including the whole trip, it cost me almost $2,500 back then, which was a lot for a poor Dominican like me. While crossing the desert, we kept it a secret from the coyote that we had the money. He only knew that someone in the US supposedly had it and would pay him once we arrived, though that wasn't true. The money was with me. Night fell and we tried to rest, but the humidity was even worse than the heat. It was incredibly uncomfortable. We all felt sticky and restless. Still, we managed to rest for a few hours, and at 5 a.m. we started walking again. That night, we only paused for a short rest because it was impossible to sleep with the heat and humidity. Plus, when the sun came up, there was no shade anywhere. Not even a rock could give us cover from the sun. It was a strange and very uncomfortable experience. As I was saying, we started walking at 5 in the morning, but a few hours later, around 11 a.m., Mickey and Makey threw themselves on the ground to rest. I decided to keep going with the Mexican guy who claimed he knew the way. The coyote stayed behind with Makey and Mickey, supposedly just to rest. Around 3 in the afternoon, I stopped and told the Mexican guy that we should wait for the others who had stayed behind. Since I wasn't sure if the Mexican guy really knew the way, I insisted that we wait for the others. So, I stayed behind to wait, but the guys never showed up. Instead, it was the coyote who arrived. I asked him where the others were, and he told me I tried to get them to come along, but they decided to turn back, but we're almost there, he said. I thought to myself, we've been walking for a day and a half already, which means it would take them another day and a half to go back. So I decided it was better to keep going and make it to the United States.
And what were you all eating?
No, there was no food left, only water.
But I imagine you were carrying plenty of water then?
Yes, we each had a gallon of water, but we had to drink the water slowly because it could run out quickly, and then we'd be in serious trouble. I even took the large water bottle completely frozen, but as soon as we started, it thawed out quickly. Hours passed, and for some reason, that day I felt very little thirst. When it hit 6 p.m., I started to feel my feet very swollen because we had already been walking for 2 days. My body was starting to shake a little, and I began to feel strange. For some reason, I could barely lift my foot, but I kept walking, making the effort to move forward. By around 10 p.m., my feet cramped up. For me, it was because we had walked too much, so I told the coyote, "Let's stop for a while because I can't move and I feel strange." Then the coyote told me he could only wait for me 10 minutes, but after that, he would leave. So I agreed. The 10 minutes passed, but I was still the same. So the Mexican and the coyote left and left me alone. This happened around 11 or 12 at night. Before leaving, the coyote told me that further ahead I would find a tunnel and that I had to go in, and then he left. But maybe it was just a lie to ease their conscience for leaving me. So I stayed there resting, hoping to recover because my feet and hands wouldn't move. When it was 1 in the morning, I started thinking and decided that I needed to hide, just in case immigration passed by and saw me and took me. At that moment, I found a small cave and went in, though I was a bit scared because maybe there was a dangerous animal or something, or maybe if I die here, no one will find me. So I left the cave, and outside of it, I slept for about 5 or 10 minutes. When I woke up, I felt very energized, as I had a dream where I was in some kind of paradise. It was a garden, very well made, with many animals. And for that reason, I woke up with a lot of energy and thought, if I don't help myself, who will? So I decided, I'll continue even if I have to crawl along the ground. I still had the gallon of water, but because I hadn't drunk water for so long, my throat was closed up and I couldn't swallow. Plus the water was extremely hot. I had a watch, and I took it off. I left behind many things that were weighing me down. Then I checked my wallet and found a New Testament, which I had taken before getting on the small boat when I left my house. It was almost 2 in the morning, so I started to repeat a psalm I knew by heart.
Weren't you ever afraid for your life when the others left you alone? What went through your mind?
No, the truth is that no thought came to my mind, except, as I told you, helping myself. And as I said, I started throwing away everything I had on me because it felt heavy. I read Psalm 91, or at least what I could see since it was dark, and I recited the part of the psalm I knew by heart. Then I took off my shirt, started wetting it with the water I had, and began rubbing it over my body. I felt relieved, like I was drinking water. Then, in the distance, I saw a light, but it really seemed incredibly far away. I thought that there had to be people there, so I believed I had to get there. But it was a very faint light, like the light from a house bulb. So I ignored the coyote because I was desperate and just focused on getting to that light. I kept walking, almost dragging myself, but I started vomiting the red liquid that circulates in our veins. It was because I didn't have water in my body, but I didn't know that. Still, I kept walking until it was about 6 in the morning. When I got there, it turned out to be a street light on a road. But as I reached the street, immigration caught me. At that moment, I was already desperate. I just wanted to find people, no matter what happened.
How long did you crawl until you reached the road?
Well, I spent about 5 or 6 hours crawling, and during that time, I lost a lot of skin from my arms and legs because they were so exposed to the sand as I dragged myself for hours. Like I said, I finally reached the road and tried to flag down a vehicle to see if someone would help. 2 or 3 cars passed, but they didn't stop. I don't know if it was one of those drivers who called to immigration, but shortly after, maybe 10 minutes later, immigration arrived. Only one officer showed up. He leaned me against his truck, and by then it was already getting light. But I vomited blood again. Luckily, instead of taking me to jail, he took me to the hospital. First, he reported me by radio to the immigration offices. When we arrived at the hospital, they were already waiting with a stretcher, and they immediately hooked me up to an IV. I was in such bad shape that, before they even got me to the room in the hospital, they had to change the IV bag because my body absorbed it so quickly.
But when the immigration officer found you, did he help you with water or anything like that?
No, he just put me in the truck and took me to the hospital. Besides, we were already in the United States. Actually, even the guys who turned back were technically already in the US. We had found a part of Mexico where the ground had a line showing when we crossed over. But later I'll tell you more about what happened at the hospital when I realized that the guys never made it back to Mexico. The thing is, at the hospital, a nurse made me drink water every 10 minutes. But honestly, I didn't feel thirsty. And I don't know why. After 3 days in the hospital, I called a cousin of mine who's in the US. When he answered, he was shocked and asked if I was really alive. Then he fainted and couldn't talk to me, which surprised me. Later, they explained that 2 of the 3 guys who went back died. The one who survived had found immigration and got first aid, then told them where the other 2 were. But when immigration arrived, they were already dead, almost mummified from the heat. My cousin's wife called me and explained that they thought I had died because my other friends in the desert didn't make it, and that really hit me hard. I even fell into a depression. So I hung up and didn't explain where I was or say anything, but I wasn't in a good mental state because things kept slipping from my memory. The doctor told me I was lucky, as most people exposed to such extreme temperatures lose their minds, which leads to their death. The unfortunate part is that my cousin, who fainted when he called the Dominican Republic to tell my family I was alive, wasn't believed because he has a reputation as a liar. When they asked him where I was, he couldn't say because he didn't know where I had called from or anything like that. Remember, this was back in the year 2000, and we didn't have the technology we do now.
When you left here for Mexico to try to enter the United States, did you have a wife and family?
Yes, of course I had a wife. The thing is, 2 days later I called again to my cousin, and he immediately insisted on knowing where I was and what my phone number was. So I gave him the information, and shortly after my family called me, and we were able to talk.
When you spoke with your family, what did they say to you?
Well, for them it was a great joy to know that I was alive, because they had even cried thinking I was dead. As for me, I didn't care because I didn't know anything about the others dying or anything like that. And since the desert is so vast, they thought I had gotten lost or died in the desert.
And while you were in the desert, did you ever think that you would never see your family again or something like that?
No, the truth is that I never thought about any of that, because I never thought something would happen to me. When I started getting scared was when I started vomiting the red liquid. But after that, the only thing I was concerned about was that I might run into immigration and be sent back. But I never thought about the consequences, and well, after I was in the hospital, that's when I started thinking about everything. After that, I remembered that my money was inside my socks. But when I arrived at the hospital, the nurse took off all my clothes and dressed me in pajamas. So I called the nurse to ask her about my socks, and I told her I needed my sneakers and socks. But she told me not to worry about that because she had thrown everything away. I got angry, and lying, I told her I promised I couldn't leave without those socks and sneakers. And of course it was a lie because I didn't want to talk to her about money since I didn't know anyone there to talk about money with. But she told me she had thrown the clothes away days ago. But I made her look for them, and by good luck, she found the sneakers and all the dirty clothes and brought the sneakers with the socks inside, holding them with 2 fingers. Of course, she was disgusted, and even I was. Those sneakers were rotten. So I told the nurse, "Leave the sneakers there on the floor." And of course, I was anxious for her to leave so I could check the sneakers to see if my money was still there. At that moment, I could move my limbs, but I couldn't run since my feet were very swollen. When the nurse left, I checked the sneakers and saw that I still had my $3,000, and at that moment, I regained all my strength. From then on, I started having many thoughts about what I should do. At first, when I was vomiting, I wanted immigration to find me, but now I felt better and had money. I stood up, looked out the window, and realized that I was on the 2nd floor. And I just thought, that's another step. That day I went to use the bathroom, but that day they put handcuffs on me, and a security officer was watching me. In the bathroom, I discovered that my legs were extremely swollen, so I couldn't do anything. From then on, I became a pastor, praying every day for an opportunity from God to stay in the United States. So the days passed, and I had been there for 2 weeks. During those days, 2 Americans arrived, interrogated me, and asked where I wanted to go. So I explained that I wanted to go to the United States because I have family there, and I wanted to be there. The incredible thing is that they spoke perfect Spanish, and they told me that the plan was for me to sign some papers they had and that I should give them an address where I would be in the United States. My heart stopped when I heard those words, and I asked myself, could it be true that they will let me go free? I was very nervous and told them, yes, okay, no problem. Then they said to me, we are going to pay for the time you've been here. And they asked if I agreed to pay for the days I had left in the hospital. I said, of course, I will. They had me sign about 10 documents. I was quite surprised and didn't understand what was happening to me. Then they took off the handcuffs, and the officer who had been taking care of me gathered his things and left. As soon as the officer left, I called the doctor and said, discharge me, I'm fine now. But the doctor told me I wasn't well. I insisted to the doctor to let me go, but the doctor said, remember, I'm the doctor. And if I say you can't leave, it's because you're not well. The doctor told me he knew what was going on, because the immigration officers explained that they had let me go, and he told me he wanted me to trust him. He suggested moving me to a room on the 6th floor so I could be more comfortable.
But did you actually feel well or not?
Well, I actually felt fine, except that I was still very swollen. My feet, face, and hands were all puffy, like balloons. Honestly, I was way more relaxed and started enjoying myself, flirting with the nurses and spending my days laughing because I felt like I was going to stay in the US. In fact, I even started a little romance with one of the doctors, and we got quite close. I was feeling great and didn't understand why they wouldn't discharge me. My family kept calling all the time, and the hospital even celebrated my birthday while I was there. Finally, the day of my discharge came, but they wouldn't let me go because someone needed to sign for me, and my cousin still lived too far away to come and sign. So I called the uncle of one of my friends who died in the desert. I expressed my condolences and explained my situation to see if he could help. Since I was in a place called San Diego, and he didn't live too far, he came by, signed my release papers, and I was finally allowed to go. The doctor and I had planned for me to live with her, and it was really sad because I'd promised her something I couldn't fulfill. I lied, saying I'd visit my family and return to stay with her. The next day, my friend's uncle bought me a plane ticket to New York, using the money I'd given him. He checked in on my behalf and handed me the ticket. When I arrived in New York, I left the airport smoothly, without needing to show any documents. Outside, I called a taxi, and just as it was starting to pull away, tons of police officers suddenly appeared. I thought they were after me, and there were so many that I decided there was no point in running. I felt crushed, thinking I'd made it so far only to get caught. Then, I saw the police push the taxi driver to the ground and handcuff him. I was terrified inside the car. Eventually, a Puerto Rican guy explained things to me in Spanish, and later I got another taxi and asked to go to the Bronx. Once there, I finally reached my cousin's house, and when he saw me, he burst into tears. After all of that, I ended up working in the US for 10 years.
You told me that you had been to the United States before. Tell me about that.
I first entered the United States as a baseball player. I had a small contract with Baltimore. I didn't make it to the major leagues. I was in the minors, but everything went downhill when I injured my arm. Since I was a pitcher, I didn't make much money. This was back in 1990 and they didn't pay me much. At that time, I had a visa. After I got injured, I went to New York. But I did something wrong there and was deported. That's how it all started, and 10 years later, in 2000, I wanted to go back.
Okay, but when you finally returned to the Dominican Republic in 2010, how did your family receive you? What happened? Tell me about it.
Imagine it was total joy for my family. After all the worry they went through thinking I was dead, and after 10 years without seeing me, it was pure happiness for them. But while I was in the United States, I was never able to get my papers. So I returned because I was deported again. I had a small restaurant over there and a license to sell alcohol, but once the license expired, I took too long to renew it. Inspectors came, and when they saw my license had expired, to them everything I was doing was illegal. They arrested me, saw my past record that I'd been deported before, and deported me again. As you can see, this business here is my own, and it reminds me of everything I've been through in life. But out of everything I lived through, the saddest was losing my companions in the desert.
Friends, this man is still living in the Dominican Republic, and his final words were that if he had the chance to go back to the United States, legally or illegally, he would try again, because life in the US is different. If you enjoy this type of video, please leave a like. I'll be uploading more stories, so don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button.